Welcome back, it's me Lou. I'm here for another action figure unboxing and review. And today it's going to be a little bit different. We're actually going to do a side-by-side comparison of the Masters of the Universe Origins Mer-Man figure. So I actually have two figures that are here. We have the first release of Mer-Man right here, and then we have the second release of the character right here. So I thought this would be a fun video to do, just because, we've gotten two different versions of the same character, and I'll go into a brief explanation of, what's different with each figure, what the origins of the figures are, and so on. Alright, so let's get this started. So first off, as you can see, their packages are pretty much identical. They're both marked for new for 2021. They have identical logos. They're both listed as Mer-Man Ocean Lord. They both have modern retro play. And as you can see here, both figures look drastically different from one another. The first version on the left and the second version on the right. So the second version actually has a sticker placed on the bubble. If you look here, it says LOP. LOP stands for Lords of Power. If I remember my He-Man history correctly, Masters of the Universe was originally called Lords of Power. And I want to say, I think this character design was based off of the initial concept of the original figure of Mer-Man. But I think the end result was a figure that looked much more like this one here. For those of you that remember also, last year for the PowerCon 2020 exclusive, they had the Lords of Power 5-pack. It was a giant box set, and the box kind of emulated the collector's case. And in that box set, you got the original 5 Lords of Power. You got He-Man, Skeletor, you got Mer-Man. Did I say Beast-Man? Beast-Man. And what was the other one? I want to say it was 5. So He-Man, Skeletor, Man-at-Arms, Beast-Man, and Mer-Man. I think that's correct. If I'm mistaken on that, write it down in the comments below. The Lords of Power exclusive box set is actually really cool. It's ridiculously overpriced in my opinion. I got it through Big Bad Toy Store. And this is one of those things I thought I really needed and wanted. And I was excited that I had it, but then I was kind of met with disappointment many months later when I found out that they're going to release those figures, such as this one here individually. I didn't unbox it, and so I don't have the actual Lords of Power figure here to compare it with. So I'm not sure if there's actually any difference between this and the box set version, like if there's difference in the paint application or accessories. But to the best of my knowledge, I remember it looking very much like this figure. So if you want to add any information in the comments below, please do so. Is there a distinct difference between the individual carded figure versus the box set one? But for now, we're just going to focus on the differences between the two retail versions and not the box set. So as I stated earlier, as you can see, these figures look very different from one another. On the back, it's kind of cool, so we're actually getting two different illustrations on the back. So on the first release, it says here, lurking in the darkest depths of the ocean, Mer-Man awaits Skeletor's orders to attack Eternia's surface world. Whereas on the right, for the version 2 figure, as ruler of Rakash, Mer-Man orders the monsters of the deep at the behest of the evil Skeletor. So it's pretty cool how they went, the extra mile and actually gave us two different illustrations, two different captions. So it's pretty exciting. I'm really stoked to have both versions of the figure. Initially, I thought I'd be happy with just having this one. Like, I already have this figure unboxed. And then when I got the Lords of Power box set, I didn't open that up. I just kind of left that alone. But for me, I was just really stoked on this. And I think in my head, I always thought that the Lords of Power one was pretty much almost the same identical figure. But then when I was at the store and I saw the retail one, kind of dawned on me. I'm like, wow, that's completely a different looking dude. And it made me kind of wish I opened up my box set. I did open up the mailer part of the box set, the giant cardboard sleeve. And I remember taking it out of the package and looking at it a couple of times. But for the most part, it was just something I decided, I paid a lot of money for this. So I don't want it, to get damaged. So I just kind of left it alone. So, I don't know. I guess it's kind of bittersweet. Like, in some ways, I'm happy that I got that expensive PowerCon exclusive. But at the same time, I'm kind of disappointed that, it was an exclusive, but the figure becomes a mainline release. So, I don't know, I'm just a little bit conflicted on that. Because if I knew this was going to come out ahead of time, I wouldn't have dropped that kind of money on the box set. But it is a nice piece to own, especially from, like, historical and collecting point of view. Also on the back, we have the two different lineups. So this guy was the first release. This was the figures that came out with his wave. And with the newer release, this is the figures that are coming out in his wave. And if you look, there's also a good explanation as to why we have so many He-Mans and Skeletors. It seems like with every wave, they always make sure to include a He-Man and Skeletor. So if you always wonder why there's so many He-Mans and Skeletors out there, it's just because they keep on releasing them with every wave. Which is, in some ways, it's smart, because if you're a collector and then you missed out on that first time of buying the figures, at least it gives you a chance to buy them again. But on the downside is that it gets to a point where everyone that wanted He-Man, Skeletor got them, and then the stores are just left with these overstocks of Skeletor and He-Man. I think the wiser approach would be to, instead of always continually releasing these exact same figures, maybe like between every second or third wave, give us a variation of He-Man or Skeletor, not always giving us the OG ones. In terms of Mer-Man's play features, both of them get the weird looking sword. As a child and even as an adult, I think his sword still looks very weird. It kind of looks like some sort of mutated corn on the cob. It's the sword of Rakash, or Rakash, depending on how you pronounce it. So let's take a look at these. Alright, so we're going to open up the guy on the left first, version 1. And, alright, so instead of doing this one at a time, I think it'd be cooler if I just opened them both up at the same time, so I could do a side-by-side comparison simultaneously. Alright, so we have version 2 on the right side. Alright, so let's look at each one's comic. This one has this comic, and it has, as usual, the included insert. This kind of details what parts of the figure are detachable. So with the new Origins line, you can kind of like figure swap pieces. So you can swap like the heads, the torsos, the arms, and the feet. And this guy has one also. So there you can kind of see that you can swap out, the similar sections. They both come with different comic books, which is nice. This one's Dimensional Doom, where this one's Sucker Punch. And it looks like each one's going to have its own different story, featuring a different cast of characters. I love these comics. It's a great bonus and a throwback to the old figures of the 80s. Yeah, so completely different cast of characters. So I think the cast of characters for each comic is dependent on the wave. So this one features Fisto and Faker. Alright, so first impressions of both of these figures while they're in their respective trays. Different, very different. So I like this guy a lot. Now there's kind of like a secret to my madness here, because I also got a an additional copy of the first release figure, and I'll go into that in a second. So as we can see here, looking at the figures while they're still in the trays, there's a lot going on here. Let's take this out. Okay, we have both figures here. Let me take out their accessories real quick. We can compare the swords also to see if they're identical or if they're different. I want to say that I think they're identical, but I might be wrong on that. Okay, there's this guy's sword. And let's get this one open real quick. And then this sword is over here. Alright, I want to take a look at the swords first. Okay, there's actually a difference between these two swords. Now, I'm not sure if it's intentional or if it's just the sake of the material that they're casted out of. So the original sword that I have on the left for the first release is actually a lighter shade of yellow than this one. The second release's sword is a little bit a deeper color. It's not as bright. So it's a much darker yellow color than this one. So the swords, at least for mine, are different. Now you look at the figures themselves. There's a lot going on here. For one, completely different head sculpts. This, I want to say, all right, I might get my details confused. So if I do, like I said, just feel free to comment below and correct me wherever I'm wrong. So I want to say this head sculpt is based off more so the original retail release from the original figure we got in the 80s. This head sculpt, it's based off of the Lords of Power, and I think it's based off more of the conceptual initial like prototype version of the figure, I think. So that's why the heads are so drastically different. Likewise, the body armor is a lot different also. Personally, I prefer this one. I think this body armor looks a lot crazier. Their color shades are different. This kind of leans more on orange, where this looks a lot more like lemon yellow. As you can see, the sculpting on both of the armors completely different. This one has such a wider collar with spikes that are protruding from the top. This one is more like a harness and with these tiny spikes at the bottom. The webbing on the sides, they look semi-identical. Once you get to the chest area, completely different story. Large emblem at the top here at the base of the neck. Smaller emblem here at the base of the neck. The actual torso armor itself, the plates are about the same size, but this one has these giant spike or like shark teeth protruding from the sides of the body armor, whereas this one doesn't really have that. It's kind of like more like bones. So this one, its belt buckle is attached to the chest piece here, and you kind of have the jewel in the middle with the like webbed fins on the sides. This one, it's a separate piece. So the belt's actually a separate piece from the armor, and the detail's kind of similar. You still have that jewel in the middle and the webbing, but then there's also these like dangly pieces on the belt. This guy here has the notorious fur bikini that's present on a lot of the Masters of the Universe figures. This one's completely different. It's a very smooth finish. This could also be the lower trunks to maybe a Masters of the WWE wrestling figure, I'm guessing. The arms appear to be the upper arms at least appear to be the same mold, but casted in different plastics. This is a much brighter color. This is a little bit darker, a little bit deeper. The forearms are completely different. This one has like the small webbed fins on the top and bottom of the forearm, whereas this one kind of has like the buccaneer long glove with a fin extending at the bottom. And his forearms and hand are yellow, whereas this one kind of retains the flesh tone. So this is completely that like teal or green color. Likewise, the boots, very different. This guy actually is wearing boots with the webbed toes. This guy doesn't have boots. Instead, he kind of has that he kind of has like that sculpted like fur look. And I believe their toes, they look like identical molds. They're just colored differently. Examining figures on the back. We can still see the changes in the armor. Yeah, so there's two different versions of Mer-Man. You know, you could get yours, you know, depending on your personal preference or what you want to display on the shelf. Let me actually open up this guy too, the second copy of this one. All right, let's make some room. And I'm gonna go. I'll go into like why I have an additional one of these in a second. All right, so as I stated earlier, you know, depending on personal preference, you know, it's up to you to decide which version of Mer-Man you want to display on your shelf or keep in your collection. You know, if you're only going to get one of them. You know, some people might opt to get both. You know, you might want to get this one. I mean, they both serve their own purposes historically, depending on how you view it. Like, it's nice to have, you know, the Lords of Power one versus the Masters of the Universe version of the figure. So as for myself, my first thought was, when I initially saw how different the figures were, it really kind of, at least in my opinion, looking at these figures, it's like, for me, the Lords of Power one is clearly the more superior figure. He has a kind of much more cartoony looking face with the larger eyes and the mouth. This guy looks more like, I don't know, he seems more, they're both monsters, but this one has a much more terrifying face, in my opinion. But when I saw this, you know, one of the distinct things about this figure is the body armor. It's a lot bulkier. It's a lot more lavish. And when I saw this, I'm like, wow, it makes the character appear more regal, more authoritative. And then I got the gears spinning in my head. You know what? I'm going to get a second one of this, or even a third, or if you want a fourth. And the way I view it is you can include both in your collection simultaneously. And if you want to give it a different explanation, you can easily say this figure here is Mer-Man. And then for me, at least, these two guys are going to be like his henchmen. You know, these are kind of like the generic cannon fodder characters. You know, here's like Mer-Man, ruler of the sea, and then he's flanked by, you know, two bodyguards or two additional henchmen. And, you know, you look at these two guys up close, you know, which one looks more dominant, which one looks more authoritative, which one looks more like a badass, and it's easily this guy, in my opinion. You know, for one, he seems a little bit more massive, especially in the head, because he has these crazy things protruding from his head, so it almost gives him more like a crown. His body armor, it's a lot more defined, a lot bigger. I mean, just when you look at the two opposing chest pieces, he has more detail, he has more armor bits, so it easily makes it look like, you know, this guy is the leader. And these are kind of like his henchmen and followers. So at least for me, anyways, in my collection, I like the idea of having this guy as Mer-Man and then these two as the henchmen. It's very much in line with like Man-at-Arms and the Eternian Guards. You know, there's a very uniform look between the characters, but then, you know, one figure is the Eternian Guard's actually an army builder. So you can actually have, you know, a standalone man-at-arms, and then at the same time you can have figures that somewhat resemble him, but they're like lower in rank, and those are the dudes that serve under him. And that's the way I kind of view this. You know, this is the king fish of the sea, and then here are like the little, you know, goldfish that are going to follow him around. And since we're on the subject of Mer-Man, let's compare him with some of the previous versions of the figure. So one of their closely related cousins, unfortunately I don't have the original Mer-Man on me, but I do have the Super 7 figure. So this came out maybe, I want to say maybe at this point 3 or 4 years ago, or no, it was less than that, so I take it back. This guy was released in 2019 according to his copyright stamp. So this is the Super 7 version of Mer-Man, and it's based off of much more of the animation model that we saw in the original cartoon. It's a fun figure. It's kind of like, they kind of take the design based off of the original Masters of the Universe figures from the 80s, but with much more modern engineering. He has a spring-loaded waist, so he can throw punches. Instead of having the rubber band that holds their legs together, it's actually, I think, a plastic peg, so you don't have to worry about it like snapping or anything like that. Posability-wise, he's not in the same league as the Origin figures. This really mimics the original 80s figures, so all you really got is like head rotation, arm movement, and leg movement. But I like this figure a lot. It's really cool. You know, so if you want to populate your oceans, you know, there's a lot of different Mer-Man figures to be had. Here's another Mer-Man. This is from the 2000 X line. So this came out in the early 2000s. I love the design a lot. I want to say this line of figures was designed and sculpted by, I want to say the Four Horsemen art studio, if I'm correct on that. And I can't remember if this was, so there were a bunch of figures during the 2000 X line that they re-released, but with like paint variations, and I can't remember if this was the first release or the second release of the figure. I love the sculpting a lot. It's, for me, when I hold this figure, it's like I've said before, the 2000 X line, I'm very nostalgic for it because I'm very fond of that time period in my life. You know, for me, it was a great time to be a collector, and it was awesome that they kind of brought back He-Man and the Masters of the Universe in such a very stylized way. This guy's play feature has a button on his back, and I believe if you press the button, it just moves his arm around. And then there's like storage for his sword back here. You can just slide his sword back there. The sculpting on this is beautiful, really detailed. The articulation's kind of hindered. It's not as deep as I'd like. Like, he can move his wrists, but there's no elbow articulation. He could kick out, but there's no knee articulation. So it's kind of weird. He's almost like statically posed, and then he's kind of like cut in certain places to provide articulation, which I think is kind of weird. But it's a great figure. I like this figure a lot. So yeah, there's this Mer-Man. And as you can see, his face resembles much more the Lords of Power Mer-Man. And then up next, we have the Masters of the Universe Classics. And this is a much larger figure. This was produced by Mattel. I want to say it came after the 2010 2000 X line. I can't remember the year specifically. This was a second, or I think it was a second release of the figure. I bought this in I want to say a 2-pack that came with so at the time Mattel was doing 2-packs. They would take one figure from the DC Classics line and then one figure from the Masters of the Universe Classics line, and then you'd kind of like get these like fantasy like matchups. So in that fantasy matchup 2-pack, I believe this guy came with Aquaman, I think. But this is a great figure, and for me, it's kind of like, I think, at least in my opinion, I kind of feel like Masters of the Universe reached the epitome of perfection with this line of toys. Now, I didn't specifically collect too many of these, just because I got into it a little bit late. And I was, for the most part, I was also just happy with the 2000 X line. But the classic figures, yeah, they're like almost like perfection. The engineering's nice. they're very the design style I think is appropriate, especially for that time period. The articulation is great, and it's such a beautiful figure. You know, if you're used to like handling like a Marvel Legends, this you'll feel very at home, you know, handling a Masters of the Universe Classics figure. You know, the articulation is very similar to that, and they're wonderful. They're really, really awesome toys. And if I remember correctly, I think Mattel had their subscription service. I think it was MattyCollector.com, and I think there were a lot of figures that were made available exclusively through that. Like I said, I was kind of out of the game collecting Masters of the Universe when the Classics line was out, and I kind of regret it. But for me, if I wanted to go back and try to recollect some of these figures, I think the prices on them are very high on the secondary market, and rightfully so. These are very quality figures. But I mean, that's why I kind of feel like the Origins line is kind of like a godsend. So if you missed out on this, you can collect the Origins stuff. But, you know, it's like comparing apples and oranges. You know, the Classics figures, much larger scale. I want to say these border on maybe 7.5-inch scale. But they're beautiful. I have friends that I've met online that have like complete or near complete collections of this style of figure. And when you see them all together, it's just really, really cool to look at. So yeah, this kind of like rounds up our review of Mer-Man. So we have Mer-Man across a couple of different generations, and it's cool. It's a fun character. I always loved listening to him talk on the cartoon. He had that weird voice where he sounds like he's talking underwater, and it's such a wonderful character design, very imaginative. So definitely a cool toy. Okay, so if I had to rate these two figures numerically, this figure on the left and this one on the right, if this one stood alone by itself, I'd rate it probably a 7. It's decent. This guy I think is superb. I'd give this guy at least an 8, an 8.5. I love the way he looks, and I don't know. For me, this is like the perfect Mer-Man. Awesome figure. So wrapping this video up, once again, my name is Lou. Thank you so much for checking out this video. If you are new to my channel, welcome. If you are a returning viewer or subscriber, thank you so much for your likes, comments, and support. I appreciate it greatly. You know, anytime someone leaves a positive comment or wants to engage, you know, I always enjoy like swapping stories and, you know, getting advice, or, you know, it's just always a good time. It's a fun community to be a part of, and I enjoy contributing to it. So until the next video, be safe, take care of yourself, buy lots of toys, and enjoy your life. All right, I'll talk to you later.